got to be very careful if the short-term, very volatile capital flow can cause a negative impact on the financial stability and the macro stability as well. I think this is obvious is the most important issue. But one thing I would really like to pick out is the new issues for this year. Because last year, we really have a two-speed recovery. Because advanced economy is much lower, 2.5% GDP growth rates. And the emerging market roughly have 7.2% GDP growth rate, so way lead. But what happened is this year, we're going to have a three-speed recovery. Because the advanced economy more or less remain 2.5, 2.8. Emerging market, a little lower to 6.8% growth rates. But between them, we have U.S. The U.S. probably will get the 3% GDP growth rate, which is quite strong. What does that mean for emerging market, for the global economy? The whole thing is, if you're really looking for U.S. economy, all the stimulus come from demand side, because it's a QE2, because of fiscal policy. So that will push the whole demand, domestic demand of the United States. Will push growth. So we expect to see strong growth as a good, but it also means U.S. probably will increase more. That will make the emerging market exports more, which there's a potential risk for the world to go back to the old normal, which was before the 2007-08. Emerging market keep exporting, advanced economy keep importing, imbalance remain, as Nouriel mentioned. I think this is the most big risk for the emerging market because they have been successfully transfer their model from export-dependent model to domestic. Yeah. But now there's a big import demand there, and we need export from emerging market. So whether the emerging market will be able to keep the trends further structural reform, keep the model to the more domestic demand-driven model, I think that's the key test for year 2011.
Azim, Premji, give us a perspective from India.
Just to take off what he said, inflation is really our key priority at the moment. It's really right on top of government priorities. And the hope is that we don't get a lot of knee-jerk reactions and a lot of freebies which go out to be able to contain some of the rising agitations of the very poor people. I think what is really happening is the slowdown of the Western world and the continued acceleration of the emerging world is really shifting balance of power in terms of where the consumption lies. And the way the trends are going in 10 years, the economies of the emerging worlds will be in excess of $20 trillion US, which is equal to the size of the US economy today, roughly, in fact, a little larger than the size of the US economy. And in terms of households with disposable incomes above $10,000, in 5 years from today, there will be more than the households in US and Europe combined. I mean, that's a dramatic shift. This is also putting a new thrust on top on multinational corporations of getting emerging countries like India, in addition to China, much higher on focus, because that's where they see the growth coming from. And the good thing is that the end result is it has to result in some amount of reciprocity, that what they sell into India, they have to buy from India, whether it be in terms of services, whether it be in terms of products, whether it be in terms of services other than information technology services. So certain selective industries can get very interesting market opportunities coming out of it going forward.
Well, let's turn to two chief executive officers of extremely well-known multinational companies. So both of you have heard about the growth in the developing markets, and I'd like you to talk about opportunities there. But I'd like both of you also to say how you see your businesses in the Atlantic core, as it were, developing in the US and Western Europe. Martin, do you want to go first?
Well, I think first observation, there's very little left to say. We may well pack up and go home. But basically, I think, if one's honest about it, we're surprised, very surprised, where we are now. If you said to me on September the 14th, 2008, would WPP's revenues, say, in the second half of last year be back to where they were pre-Lehman or pre-monoline crisis or pre-subprime crisis, I would have said, you need your head examined. And we're also, regrettably actually, 8% down in terms of the number of people employed in the company, net. Net down 12 in 2009 when the world was going to come to an end. 2010 we saw a little bit of expansion. Now, 2010 from our point of view, just to use your acronyms, was lovey-shaped rather than love-shaped. And the difference was that America, the traditional markets, the developed markets actually, the mature markets, rebounded much more strongly than we thought. We were up 8% in America against 2% GNP growth. So America behaved really like a faster-growing market last year. Part of that was dead cat bounce. But part of it was also due to the fact, I think, that American corporates and Western corporates are really uncertain. And I don't think last night's speech really gets us further in terms of removing that uncertainty. Multinational corporates have about $2 trillion in cash on their unleveraged balance sheets. Their headcounts are down. There has not been productivity increases. There has been reductions in headcount. These companies are more efficient. The administration made the point to us in Washington at the Business Council, U.S. Business Council, a few months ago, that profits actually in the third quarter of last year were 30% better than before Obama took power. So they're much more efficient, but they're much more uncertain. Now, this year, we think the world will move to a more love-shaped basis. So we'll see Western Europe continuing to be tepid growth, Western continent, the Atlantic core. America more U-shaped. And the fast-growing markets, BRICS, Next 11, CIVITS, whatever your choice of acronym is, will continue to be V-shaped. The risks, the chief risk, I think, has been said, is inflation and what the interest rate response will be to that. The other risk is the political risk, what we've seen in North Africa, Tunis, and Egypt, and the fact that that might spread. The residual issues of the Middle East, of Israel, Iran, etc., are there, and commodity prices impacting on commodity price inputs. So net, I think corporates are still uncertain. Our business grew last year, interestingly, because of that uncertainty. An unwillingness in the West to invest in capacity, in increasing fixed cost. Boards are terrified of making mistakes. The crises that we've seen at BP, at Goldman Sachs, the product recalls from Toyota makes boards, non-executive directors, extremely cautious. Who in their right minds would want to be a non-executive director of a public company? The risk-reward ratio just doesn't work. So what you do, and CEOs don't want to lose their jobs, what you do is you pull in your horns. You go for growth. And I just leave you with this observation. The IBC, which I'm chairman of here in Davos, did a survey in August of last year. 4 points. Uncertainty at an all-time high. Strategic response is investment in BRICS and Next 11. Biggest shortage is talent, despite high unemployment rates. The biggest challenge we face is youth unemployment. 25% in the UK, 40% in Spain and other markets. This is the biggest challenge that we face in the long term. And the last point, green is still golden. The two first points are the key ones. High uncertainty. What's the response? Investment in BRICS and Next 11, where you do see relative growth.
Very good. Jim?
Yeah, Michael, I think that, as Martin said, the first speakers nailed it on the sort of macro level on the economy. I think that Martin's summary that the love continues as far as the LUV, I think that's absolutely true. I think when you believe and think about the emerging markets, there's actually some changes taking place. You look at the IPOs, increasingly dramatic numbers coming from the emerging markets as opposed to the legacy of IPOs in the Atlantic region, as you've called it. I think you're seeing a huge immersion of E2E trade, just bypassing the developed markets. I think you're seeing, on top of that, some real shift in terms of investment and acquisition from the emerging markets to the developed markets. I think there's a few things that haven't been talked about that will be real important, not necessarily just in 2011, but beyond. And one is demographics. No one has talked about that. But if you look out to 2020, on balance, the average age of the population in China and the U.S. will be about the same, 37 or 38 years old. On balance, the average age of the population in Western Europe and Japan will be about the same, and it's going to be 47 or 48 years old. And on balance, the average age of the population in India and the Middle East is going to be 27 or 28 years old. This has enormous impact on an array of policy issues and certainly on economic prosperity and growth. Add to that the whole demographics around gender. I think demographics will be a big issue. I think we're also going to see, to your comment on sort of the Atlantic region, we've seen the same things Martin talked about as far as growth returning, which is great. But I think you're going to see increasing tension between public sector and private sector. What it has in many countries been a historic sort of deal that working in the public sector was safer. You didn't have to run the risk of being separated or out-counseled, and wages might have been a little bit lower. And now has turned around. In many countries in the last couple of years during the crisis, we've seen job gains in the public sector, massive job loss in private sector. We've seen total comp and benefits higher in the public sector, early retirement, bigger pensions. I think that's going to be an increasing source of tension. Third and final thing is I think as we move forward, the role of the entrepreneur is going to get a lot more important. We've all talked about jobs and the unemployment. Nobody builds jobs, nobody lifts communities, nobody lifts lives like entrepreneurs when they are uncertain. To Martin's point, they tend to stay on the sideline out of the game. Making sure that countries do enough to encourage entrepreneurial activity, making sure that even big companies do enough to encourage entrepreneurship from within is going to be key.
I want to come back to your public sector, private sector split in a minute because I think there are some very interesting points that we can take on that. Let me come back to Nouriel and just get you to concentrate on one of your downside risks, which is sovereign debt risk, because you were very outspoken throughout the whole of last year or not outspoken, but sharply critical of the way in which the Europeans were handling their debt crisis. My guess is that if this meeting had taken place even 6 weeks ago, it would be European debt all the time. Are you still as worried as you were in the middle of last year that something could go badly wrong in the EU?
Yes, I'm worried. I think that there is a policy response that is more aggressive was last year. But I think that you have four fundamental issues that you have to resolve in the Eurozone. The first one is you need more liquidity and official resources to avoid runs. And there is a risk of the contagion now spreading from Greece, Ireland, Portugal, to places like Spain and Belgium. Spain is too big to fail, but also too big to be saved without greater official resources. So you need that. The Germans are still resisting. The second one is there are some countries that are effectively near insolvent. Greece, even if they do everything in the MFU program, they're going to end up with a public debt of 150% of GDP in 3 years. Argentina and Russia defaulted when their debt was at 50% of GDP. So we need orderly and early restructuring that are market-oriented of the public debt in the countries that are